All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to I forgot to look, the 27th, 26th, 20, something episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy. And as my very special guest today, I have Kevin Spaans, who is a creator here on YouTube and somewhat different from my usual guest in that the focus of your channel, Kevin, is not actually fantasy per se, but it is very much related to writing. And for anybody who wants to improve on the sentence level, on the level of grammar and syntax and punctuation and that sort of thing, Kevin has an extremely useful channel. So I'll let you talk about that. And first, just say hello. Hello, Kevin. How are you?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me first and foremost. I'm honored to be here. Like you said, I don't exist in the typical space that you create, so it's awesome to be welcome to the space. And I've been watching your videos for, I don't know, as long as you've been making them, pretty much watching your journey. And it's awesome to hear you talk about different books, different elements. And I also love your ability to showcase others. I love how you promote self-published authors. I love your ability to bring others onto the channel. And again, like I said, I don't make booktube content, and I'm here. So I think it's just such an awesome thing. It speaks volumes to your character and what you bring to YouTube. And I just love your humility and the whole energy, which is why I'm excited to be here today. But as far as my channel, yeah, I do educational content, grammar, mostly grammar fundamentals, I would say.
Uh-huh.
So things like semicolons, dashes, commas, hyphens, parentheses, possessive nouns. So if it's on the keyboard, we pretty much cover it. So if you're looking to improve on the technical level, that's basically what the channel is about. So
Yeah, no, that is just so very important. I think you're doing some very important work there. And I do believe that YouTube is a wonderful platform for exactly the kind of content that you're doing. And I just think that so many of my viewers are people who are interested in writing or aspiring to write or already are writers. And so it is one thing that I often see when I'm reading not just self-published, but also, the traditionally published too. I think, oh my goodness, this person really could use a comma lesson,
yeah, yeah, exactly.
So, I think it's really helpful to have that kind of content in an accessible way, because not too many people have the patience these days to sit down and read a grammar handbook and do the exercises and stuff like that. You and I both know that because we're both educators.
Yeah, yep, certainly.
So yeah. So I think it's great what you're doing. So that's something I am very happy to shout about and say, hey guys, if you want to learn the mechanics, which to me, that's where you start. You can have a
Yeah.
great story. You can have a great story, but if you don't know the mechanics, you don't know how to put together a sentence. The greatest story in the world won't be expressed as well as it might otherwise be. So
Right. I always think of writers like in contemporary fiction, like a David Foster Wallace, if you're familiar,
yeah,
who can
he's
write
great.
these sentences that go on for like a page. And I kind of think the way that I like to explain it to people is grammar allows you, once you know the rules, you can break them to achieve, certain
Yeah.
effects. And so the best writers that I can think of, they take the rule, and their mastery of that rule allows them to break it to achieve something beyond what would typically be considered, okay. But if you don't know the rules, it's hard to break them intentionally, right? You end up breaking them accidentally or unknowingly, and that can cause the reader to fumble and kind of ruin the experience of reading, and can turn a lot of people off. I feel like we talk about prose a lot, or booktube talks about prose a lot, and there is something to be said for that as far
Oh
as
yeah.
your ability to construct a sentence and create fluidity and cohesion in your writing. And if you don't have that, if you don't have those basic mechanical understandings, it can be very difficult for you to pull that off. So
I agree. In fact, and this is me, and I understand that other people feel differently about this, but I tend to be one of those who does get booted out of the story if I see a comma splice or some obvious typo or error or something of that nature. And that's not something you want to happen when you're an author. You don't want your reader to get booted out of the story. So familiarity with all these things is the way to avoid that, and to equip yourself to make your story shine even more.
Yeah, my patience for that is remarkably high, I think, as a reader. But I do look for consistency. So if someone is, dropping out a comma with two, independent clauses or something, if they're doing that all the time, that's okay because I can kind of see that consistency and perhaps assume some intention there. But if it's really rocky, it's hard for me to. I try not to be like a grammar snob, the typical, sort of grammar snob. And I think I do a good job of not being that in my public life outside of teaching. But it is easy as a reader to sort of, like you said, get hiccuped by those different elements. And as high as my threshold is for that, I still do notice it. So
yeah. Oh yeah. I can't not notice it. And that's the educator in me, of course, but it's also the storyteller in me, I think, and the story appreciator. So it's just something I feel like, if you want to tell your story, put in that effort to learn those rules. So yes, you can break them sometimes to great effect. So as you said. So, but everybody, I will have, of course, a link to Kevin's channel, which is Kevin Spaans, in the description below. So go and check that out, see what he's got there if you want some help with those kinds of mechanics and to help you enrich your writing even more. But we also are here to talk about fantasy, since this is Dear Dr. Fantasy. And I think a good place to start then would be for me to ask you, Kevin, about your reading journey. So on the premise that you are what you read, what are some of the important reads that you have encountered over your years, going back to little Kevin, and some of the formative ones that have brought you to where you are now, a person who is a fantasy fan and also a writer as well. And we can talk about that too, if you'd like. So go ahead and take it away.
Yeah. So ever since I was in elementary school, we would get these book magazines every so often, and kids would order books out of them, and those books would come a few weeks later. And I remember my mom and dad always being like, "Well, we don't have the money for that." They encouraged me to read, and I always loved to read. But there was this particular series that I had my eye on for, it felt like ages, called Deltora Quest. It's an Australian children's series, kind of in the realm of like the Lord of the Rings clones of like the 90s and things like that. I feel like I think it came out in the 90s. Don't quote me on that, but it's just a typical sort of quest fantasy. Follows a small party of adventurers who are sort of fighting against a dark lord and traveling and collecting these gems of power to vanquish the drill, right?
Sounds good. Yeah.
So that was my first one. That really got me hooked on fantasy. And that's a fairly long series. I still have those books on my shelf, actually. And I would just reread those over and over again. I'm kind of an addictive person with books and things. I do reread a lot. I know some people are not rereaders. I definitely am. And I enjoy going through books over and over again. So that was the first one, Deltora Quest. And then the Redwall series with the animal dudes,
Yeah.
And then Narnia, obviously. I don't know that I'd call a series of unfortunate events fantasy, but there are definitely fantasy elements to it, maybe.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah.
And then from there, it kind of, I think that was around grade school time. It transformed into a lot of manga.
Okay. So wait, you didn't mention Harry Potter. Was that not one of the?
So that's actually an interesting thing. Harry Potter is probably maybe my favorite fantasy series. No, it's a little taboo to say these days, given the politics of everything. But we'll leave those.
I tend to separate the art from the artist.
So do I.
Respect to these things.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And frankly, I think at this point, Harry Potter is such a phenomenon that it doesn't belong to any one person, really.
Yeah.
So, I personally, that's my take. I'm sensitive to the issues involved, of course, but I also think that it became such a huge and important story to so many people that it has a life of its own that I separate from whatever views the author might have. So
yeah, with Harry Potter, I only had the 5th book growing up.
Oh,
and
wow.
So that was the only one I could read, which happened to be like the most gigantic one, right? But I never really had access to it For whatever reason. I probably could have gotten access to it. It's not like I couldn't go to the library or something, but I would kind of settle for the movies in that time period. And the same is true for Lord of the Rings, I think.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
didn't read Lord of the Rings and I didn't read Harry Potter until I was, I believe, like a fully fledged adult, really.
yeah.
Which
That's a
in a
lot of
way, I
people,
think,
actually. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I think I'm kind of happy about that because it has allowed me to appreciate them in unique ways that as the nostalgia wasn't really there for me,
yeah,
I was able to
yeah.
kind of feel fresh almost. So yeah, a lot of those typical children's stories, children's fantasies, Peter Pan and things like that,
Okay.
the Phantom Tollbooth, these little kind of whimsical ones. So yeah,
Huh.
those are where I got started.
All right. Well, sorry, I sidetracked you there.
No, that's okay. I could go on forever, so it's good that you got me off at least.
Oh, no problem. But yeah, we can continue. You had talked about those youthful influences, I guess, and so from there, where did you go? What came next?
I had a break from probably traditional fantasy for several years because I was introduced to manga and anime at that
Oh, you were
time,
talking
maybe in
about
like the
manga. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I just got absorbed. My friends were also into it, and their parents would whenever they would go to the mall, they would do their shopping, and we would stay in Barnes and Noble and just sit on the floor between aisles and just read and read and read. And whenever Christmas or birthdays would come around, I would always try and get more manga chapters and things like that. So
Oh, cool. So
that
you
took
may
over my
know that
life
I'm
for a
I'm
while.
reading my first manga now, which
Yeah,
is
Vinland Saga, right?
Vinland Saga. Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen some of those discussions with Murphy. Those are great.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm loving those discussions. But I assume you've read Vinland Saga.
yeah, I'm fully caught up. So however many hundreds of chapters there are, I'm
I'm
fully
almost
caught
fully
up.
caught up
Oh,
myself. Like
really?
it'll
Really?
be pretty soon, actually,
Yeah.
like this coming week. Yeah. So
Yeah. The that one in Berserk, I think you were considering too. Is that right? Are there
definitely,
plans for that?
I mean, Berserk is probably the most recommended manga for me. I know that One Piece, maybe, I don't know for sure because I'm relatively ignorant still, but
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
guessing that One Piece is the most popular manga.
Yeah, I would say that's true. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. But for
But
your kind of tastes, I feel like
for
Berserk may
me,
be
yeah,
more.
Vinland Saga was a great start
Mhm.
because I'm into the Viking
Of
and
course, yeah.
English stuff, and Berserk seems to be the next most recommended for me.
Yeah.
But there are others that aren't talked about quite as much, at least in my little corner of BookTube, like Kingdom, I think is one of them.
Yep, Kingdom is kind of in that same vein, that medieval
Okay.
fantasy kind of area.
Yeah, yeah, and there are a couple others that I've written down that people recommend. They sound really intriguing,
Hmm.
but the people tend to recommend the ones that are a little more grown up, obviously,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
but also that seem to be more historical in nature. That to plug into some like medieval or dynastic period of history in some part of the world. So
sure. Yeah,
yeah,
Berserk is probably my favorite manga.
is it okay?
Yeah, probably of them all. I think Vinland Saga is right up there, maybe in the second or third spot.
So tell me what's
Uh,
great about Berserk. Give me a little sales pitch, if
oh
you will.
man, Berserk is the way I try to describe it. It's a tale of two people. It's these two individuals who come into each other's lives with very different backstories and very different motivations. And at some point, their paths diverge again, and it's just kind of about um, their sort of spiral from going away, coming back, going away, coming back. And I don't want to spoil too much, so I'm tiptoeing around a lot of it, but it's
Yeah, yeah.
about two men basically and their journeys. And it's kind of incredible that it's so good when it's really just about two people and
Huh.
how they go about their lives. There's definitely some really dark elements to it. It's way
Okay.
darker than Vinland Saga, I would say.
Really? Okay.
As far
Okay.
as I would definitely put it firmly in the grim dark, sort of category.
Grim dark.
And
Okay.
it's
So is
some elements of
humor
it are horror, kind
is
of.
there humor in there at all, or is
There
it?
is. I kind of share the same, like similar feelings as Mike from Mike's Book Reviews, right? About some of the humor in there. He's not, at least from what I understand, he's not a huge fan of some of the humor elements because they're a little bit childish. And I
Uh-huh.
do share those feelings, but there are lighthearted moments, and there's a lot of character development, and a lot of internal conflict and external conflict. So I just like it because the two characters are so compelling. The One of them is just it's a real determined grit type character, and the other
Mm.
is really a horrible person. But
Oh,
you, in a way, he's so kind of charming and alluring. And drawing the character himself is written so well that in weird points you kind of find yourselves like, why do I like this character? He's completely reprehensible, right? But it can kind of speaks to the quality of the writing to that you're
uh-huh.
drawn to a character that is such a bad person.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so sorry, that was kind of a aimless spiel, but Berserk is amazing. It's about two dudes and their journeys, and it's awesome.
I don't think it was aimless at all, actually. You hit on some pretty cool things there. The idea, first of all, if we could talk about the idea of a character who is obviously reprehensible, but it's compelling and fascinating. I mean, you do have a character like that in Vinland Saga as well.
Yeah, Askeladd,
Obviously,
right? If
Askeladd.
that's who you're thinking of, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's exactly who I was thinking of.
Hmm.
Um, Even Thorfinn, at first is kind of like that in a way. But yeah, that seems to be a thing, not just in manga, but I think in fantasy in general, especially nowadays. And regarding humor, I have very limited experience because I've only read the one manga, but it seems to me that manga has a place, or that humor has a place in manga. That
Yeah,
you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like that's a feature that's probably fairly common, maybe even essential to manga, and maybe because a lot of what happens in manga is pretty tough. It's pretty violent. It's there's a lot of really, it sounds like Berserk is even more so than Vinland Saga, as you said. So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so I've always found that in fantasy, and I could use Malazan as a great example, it really helps if you're dealing with tough stuff to have humor in there to balance it out. And you need those lighter moments, I think, to give you to alleviate the sense of oppression sometimes from the really dark, difficult, gritty stuff,
Yeah,
which has
certainly.
a place, of course, in storytelling. It's important that we deal with such things, but also life has humor, it has beauty, it has
Right.
hope, so I feel like that's an inclusion that I would rather have than not have. But
Yeah, I think anime and manga are both similar in that the humor is really it doesn't it's kind of hit or miss. There's
okay.
really no in between. And it's even story to story, right? Like I'm trying to think of like the humorous elements in Vinland Saga. Maybe like Torkel or whatever his name
Oh
is, the
yes,
big
yes.
guy and
Thorkel is one.
yeah, sorry,
Sometimes
his name.
they
Yep.
that Yukimura just even separates the humor from the main narrative, and he has these little
Right.
like interludes that are
Hmm. Yeah.
those don't usually make me laugh, to be honest. But it's a lighthearted moment. I
Right.
tend to like the humor that he has in the story a little bit more, and it's not that frequent. But yeah, Thorkel is a great example. Somebody who makes me smile and chuckle a bit for
Right.
sure.
I think the elements of humor that are often found in manga that I see is just how animated and kind of extra like some of the characters can be.
Uh-huh.
They're so loud or they're so I mean literally animated, right? With
Yep.
whether it be their movements or their body language or their facial expressions or whatever. And yeah, it's hard because I think every story and like every situation in life, I mean, there's different types of humor, right? And some humor lands for you and some doesn't. But when I think of manga, yeah, I think that's definitely kind of a calling card for them in that there is a lot of humor in basically every manga. There's always those moments of lightheartedness. It just depends on whether it works for you or whether it doesn't. And I think that can be a huge turnoff for some people
Uh-huh.
if they don't like that kind of humor or they don't like the particular kind of humor in the series that they're reading. It can really kill the vibe. But for me, I think Vinland Saga, I think Berserk and stuff like that, it works all right for me. And even if it doesn't work, it's not really something that kills it for me necessarily, but I know that it
Uh-huh.
does for a lot, or it does and can for a lot of people. So,
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I think the character Gudrid is as well in Vinland Saga. There's a humorous element to her character. This is serious
mhm.
stuff too, but there's a humorous side to her, I think, as well. Um, Particularly in the flashbacks when she's a little kid, and there's one panel that comes to mind where she's holding a teddy bear,
Right.
that sort of thing, which is of course anachronistic, but it's part of the fun, I guess. But
You've pushed through the Farmland arc in Vinland Saga, is that right?
that's right. Yeah, I'm actually in the third arc now.
Cool.
So if you're talking about the books that I am currently reading, well, by the time this video comes out, actually, I will have discussed books 10 and 11. So basically almost done. I mean, there's
Sure.
and a bit of 12, which is I think that's where the third arc ends as you get a little bit into book 12.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to be pretty much caught up because I think the 13th book is not out yet, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I just checked the chapters online, so I'm not sure what books they
Okay.
fall into. But
Yeah.
but what are your thoughts on that arc without being too spoiler? I don't know how spoilery you're willing to go, but
Yeah, no, I won't spoil it at all. I think that Yukimura's tackling some important themes in the third arc that not that he neglected them entirely, but I think they weren't the focus in the first two arcs. One is very important to me is gender, and especially the female side. Now he's done a lot in the first two arcs with masculinity and what it means to be a man, and how particularly sons inherit notions of masculinity from their fathers, and he's done a really great job of delving into that. Not so much women, though. And the third arc is where I think he's really getting into women's roles and how they are often pushed into these roles and different ways that they might go about defying them, and authoring their own stories. So I think that's a great thing that he's doing in there. It's in terms of the action, because there's a lot of action, there's a lot of violence and that sort of thing in the first arc, especially a little bit less so in the second. So I think the pacing slowed from the first to the second. It's probably slowed even more from the second to the third.
mm-hmm.
That doesn't bother me. Sorry.
Yeah. Do you like that?
It doesn't bother me at all. I think he's doing great work with the themes. So that's very important to me. He does a lot with symbolism, and he's got a lot of rich stuff going on there. So I'm plenty invested in the third arc. I like it a lot, actually. So I do recognize, though, that it is slower than even the second, which was slower than the first.
Right.
So,
yeah, a lot of people, I think, say that that's the best arc in manga. A lot of people think
the third arc.
Yeah, the Farmland one. Yeah, a lot of people point to that as like being
one of,
or sorry, yeah, the Farmland arc. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Seem to think that that's like one of the best arcs in my. I can agree with that, or I can at least definitely see that point. I love the slowness of it, especially given how like just heavy and aggressive for the first parts were, and how sort of violent and all that kind of stuff they were. I think that slowness, especially for the character development, is really helpful when you take away sort of the character's existence or his reason to live, in a sense, or the way that he's operated, his lifestyle. You kind of take that away from him and see what happens. And I think it's a pretty wonderful transition. It's abrupt and it's definitely catches you off guard, but I loved it.
I think you're making a great point there. The fact of the matter is, for readers to feel invested in characters, you need slower moments. This is something that I'm more familiar with in fantasy. But for me, if a book is just nonstop action, I tend to not care so much about the characters. I need those quieter moments. I need those moments of reflection to feel a sense of who this person is, other than kick-ass warrior. I need that person to be more fleshed out. And you can't do that if it's just constant action. So I need those mountains and I need those valleys in the storytelling. And I value those quiet moments of bonding with the characters a lot. Plus, Yukimura is exploring nonviolence in a manga which has a lot of violence, and which is a very tricky thing to do, I think, to explore this theme of nonviolence in a way that feels authentic and feels compelling in this world that he's obviously he's fictionalizing it, but it's full of violence. And so that is a task that I think anyone who would try to undertake that would find it fairly difficult.
Yeah, I think that's kind of something that I actually often forget is that idea of pacifism, and the importance of that. And as Thorfinn develops, his, understanding of that changes, right? I love the mug, by the way. And
Thank you.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think that's a huge point. That's very very rare, and you don't see that pulled off or attempted very often, let alone pulled off, to implement elements of pacifism into kind of a warring, like I said, aggressive story, and it can feel not disingenuous, but it can feel kind of forced if not done right. And I think it feels really good in Vinland Saga, and that theme kind of weaves in to the mix often enough and powerfully enough to make it really feel like it was a home run.
Yeah, for sure. So I am very intrigued to hear more about. So you're a big time manga reader. You were, and you still are.
Yeah,
Which is very cool. And it sounds like if you were to recommend my next manga after Vinland Saga, it sounds like you're leaning toward Berserk, or
yeah. I think
something else.
I think Berserk is probably the one that I would recommend. I mean, my favorite is probably Berserk, and then like I said, Vinland Saga is in there somewhere. I don't know if you've heard of like Vagabond or
yes, Vagabond is another one that gets recommended.
That's a good one. Murphy's reading Full Metal Alchemist right now, and that's one of my favorites. And another favorite of mine is Hunter x Hunter, which is probably not maybe up your alley as far as the stuff that you usually read, but it's more of a fighting, like I don't know. It's closer to like more of the fighting kind of anime type thing than it is to like the medieval or classic fantasy stuff. Not that you wouldn't like it, but I think based on what kind of content that you usually make and stuff that you usually review, I feel like Berserk and Vagabond would be definitely more your lane.
Logical place to look.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Very cool. So what are some other great fantasies that you love? What are some, if you wanted to just bring out a list of this is not something you do on your channel, so I'll give you an opportunity. What are your top 10 fantasies of all time?
Yeah. Okay. So as a teacher, I prepared notes, so I am ready for this question,
Awesome.
The ones that come to mind the most are Harry Potter, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't know if these are in any particular order, so I'm just going to kind of throw out a few, but Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
The Kingkiller Chronicles.
Wait, what? Sorry, what Chronicles?
The Kingkiller Chronicles.
Oh, Patrick Rothfuss. Yes.
Yep. You had mentioned something about Lord of the Rings. Sorry, I talked over you there.
Oh, no, not at all. My fault. I interrupted you. But yeah, you had my approval for having Lord of the Rings on your list, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to make sure that I had read it fresh for this conversation. So I'm cruising through them actually as we speak right now.
Oh, great.
I found an audiobook that has this nice British accent and also has the music from the movies and also has ambience in it. So it's hard to stay awake when I listen to it.
That was my
because
problem.
You hear the crackling fire and the music, but I'm getting through it one at a time.
That's the thing. I'm interrupting you again, but I tried to listen to an audiobook, and it was Andy Serkis reading Fellowship of the Ring, which he's brilliant. I love Andy Serkis and I love Fellowship of the Ring, but I just couldn't do it. I cannot do audiobooks. I'm so bad. If I did it at night before bed, I would fall asleep. And if I did it any other time, if I'm trying to do something else, even if it's outside walking or something, it's just, I keep wanting to rewind because that's how I read. When I read a book, I'm constantly going back to admire a sentence or something. So it doesn't work so well with an audiobook where I'm constantly trying to go back and rehear. It didn't work for me. But
anyway. My friends have joked because ever since I mentioned that we'd be having this chat months ago, I had said, hey, I'm going to kind of commit to re-going through Lord of the Rings again. And I had mentioned the audiobook to them and the ambience and the music. And the joke was that I was never going to make it out of the Shire because every time I would listen to the audiobook, I would fall asleep. So, but I have powered through and in some cases have gone away from the audiobook and read the print version to kind of power through some of those areas. But yes, Lord of the Rings is great. The Witcher is one of my favorite series.
Oh, you like The Witcher? Yeah.
I love The Witcher. Have you read that? Or any of
I've read the short story collections, both of them. I have not actually read the novels yet. It's not that I'm not going to. I just haven't prioritized it yet. But I will eventually read the novels. I hear a lot of people who love them, and then I hear people who are kind of like the short stories better or the first few novels and don't like the last ones.
Yeah,
That sort of
yeah.
thing it's an opinion I hear a lot, but
Yeah, I'm moving through. I'm actually not done with the novels, but I've read the short story collections as well, and I'm moving
uh,
through the novels now. And I would say the same. I just love the short stories in that it's a little different than what most people do.
yeah,
Just to
yeah,
have stories like that are like shorter, and are not full length novels. So I'm not quite committed to an opinion yet on the novels because I'm not far enough for me to make that opinion. But I
yeah.
love the short stories so much, and so I definitely consider it one of my favorites.
And he does some clever
Discworld,
stuff with the fairy tales in there too, which I like.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of philosophy in The Witcher, and I find that really cool. It's a little deeper than traditional sort of that grimdark
Yeah.
area for me.
Yeah,
Um,
no, he does some, I think, important reflecting on othering and others and that sort of thing in there. And I think the way we treat the world as humans who think of themselves as superior and separate from the rest of the world. So
yeah. Yeah, The Witcher for me, I sorry, getting off track again. I'm supposed to be listing
no,
things and I
it's
just
good.
keep
No,
going.
we can get
Yeah.
off track all we want. So yeah.
But The Witcher for me, the most powerful theme in The Witcher is to me is that it's kind of like it seems like the world is kind of running out of monsters for Geralt to deal with, right? And this is all he's ever known how to do, and he's really
Mm,
good at it. So he's very efficient at doing it. So
mm,
he kind of, I feel like you get the sense that he knows that at some point his kind of like Thorfinn in a way, like the purpose of his life is going to kind of come to an end pretty soon. Like these
mm.
monsters are going to be gone, or he's going to finish the rest of them off. And then what will he do? And that's
Wow.
kind of been his whole reason for existing and his whole motor. So what is his life going to be when the thing that he kind of exists and identifies with uh, doesn't exist anymore? And I think that's a
Yeah.
super powerful theme to kind of read about because you can see parallels with that in real life too. If you have a profession or something like that, or you're maybe an athlete or something, and
Oh yeah.
your kind of days in that field are numbered, and you wonder, well, if this is my whole identity, who am I going to be, and what am I going to do when it's gone? So
That's
I love that
interesting.
about The
Yeah, yeah.
Witcher.
My mind actually went to soldiers and the difficulty of adjusting to civilian life after being a
Yeah.
soldier, so yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I didn't know that was going to be a feature in the novels, so that's a
I
nice
don't
thing
know
to.
how much it's coming up in the novels yet, but the short stories definitely hit
Uh-huh,
on that. And I'm a little too early in the novels to speak with certainty about it, but
uh-huh.
I'm liking it so far.
Good,
Um,
good. All right.
Others on the list would be not all of Discworld because I haven't read all of Discworld, but
Oh,
like
Discworld.
Equal Rights and things like that. I saw the conversation you had a talk with that about with your dad, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I love that one. I love the humor. The humor in that in those books are just it works for me every time. It's just so clever and so thoughtful. Um,
much needed too. I mean,
yes, yes,
for
yes.
me so far, I've only read 4 Discworld books, but they've always been welcome breaks from the epic, violent sort of fantasy that I is my staple really. But
Yeah,
I like having a laugh sometimes, and it's surprisingly effective what Terry Pratchett does there, because in the process of giving us a story that gives us these laughs, he's also making some very serious points about the society that we live in, and there's some really interesting critique in there, I think.
yeah. There's that levity, but there's also that, like you said, that poignant sort of commentary on different things. It's a
Yeah.
very I like comedy that's very specific, even at the risk of like not like kind of alienating some people who don't quite get the joke or get the reference. And I feel like he does that really well, and I appreciate that a lot. But other than that, I like Earthsea. Um,
Cool. Yeah, of
but
course. Yeah.
what are some other ones? I do like some of the ones that are more like influenced, like Eastern influence. So there's a
Oh
couple.
yeah.
Kiki's Delivery Service is a Japanese novel that I like a lot. Um,
Neat.
I like Howl's Moving Castle. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Of
That's a
course.
British
Yeah.
one though, not a Japanese one. But I love that. I love the adaptation of that movie and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And some of those little one-off standoffs, and some of the children's ones, like Little Prince and like I said, Peter Pan,
Uh-huh.
Phantom Tollbooth. So a lot of them more whimsical, children's fantasy still sticks with me today, just because I love what it does. It just feels so cozy to me. It kind of has that Harry Potter effect, and that it just feels like you're kind of sitting around a fire.
That's great. Yeah. Huh. A little bit, perhaps more less cozy, but somehow whimsical and I feel haunting in a good way would be some of Neil Gaiman's books too. I don't know if you've read Neil Gaiman yet or not, but
Yeah, yeah.
the ocean at the end of the lane, for
Yep.
example,
Yep.
would be maybe something. It's a little bit creepier though, honestly, but
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
same time, very dreamlike, I think.
Yeah, he has that whimsical sort of surreal vibe.
Yeah.
He reminds me a lot of probably my favorite author in general, who's actually not a fantasy author, Haruki Murakami.
Oh
He's a
yes.
Japanese
Okay.
author, and they
Yeah.
kind of have a lot of those similarities. I feel like in the way that they write, it's kind of they blend that reality with fantasy really well, and they kind of swim between the two really nicely. And they have that whimsical, dreamlike element that you mentioned. Yeah.
Okay. Now, what would you recommend to start with Murakami?
Oh man. Um, my favorite book by his is probably South of the Border, West of the Sun.
Okay.
Um, but all of his stuff is good. After Dark is a novel that has a few fantastical elements to it. It's kind of a dreamlike sleep that one of the characters is in, and there are fantasy elements within the dreams and things. So,
Okay.
but yeah, I love
Would
that.
you call it magic? I've spoke to someone recently about this author actually, which is cool.
Oh,
But would you call it magic realism or not?
I think he's categorized technically as like surrealism, I guess.
Surrealism.
So
Okay.
like, I guess, but I don't hang myself too much on like the genre names, but
Yeah.
I just love the way that he writes character, and the way that he speaks so well on like alienation and loneliness, which can be a very big
Ah.
themes. And a lot of his characters are men, and that's a theme that men, I feel like, don't get enough exposure to, and
Mhm.
don't get enough of a chance to sort of therapize and get through and work through in a healthy way. So I love that he approaches those themes and tackles them with like integrity and genuinely and things like that. So
Okay. So Kafka on the Shore is maybe the most well known, or IQ 84, or
yeah, I guess it depends on. I think he's like the best-selling author internationally from Japan, maybe of all time. I don't know
really?
if that's true or not, but I think he excels with audiences outside of Japan a lot more. I don't think he's like the
Oh,
best-selling author in Japan, but as far as
interesting.
his audience abroad, and I think it just depends. Like 1Q84 is based on like 1984. It's like
Uh-huh.
his kind of interpretation of that. Kafka on the Shore, I have that on my shelf too, and I didn't love that one. So not he doesn't kind of hit it every time for me, but After Dark, South of the Border, West of the Sun, Norwegian Wood, pretty much everything he does is good. But there are some Kafka on the Shore was one of the rare ones that just sort of didn't quite work for me. I guess this is a theme, and I was kind of hoping to talk to you about this and get your thoughts on this. Is for fantasy series and books in general, I don't like to be confused. I like to be intrigued at the beginning.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So I feel like a lot of fantasy that turns me off is fantasy that starts me with like, and then character I don't know picked up weapon I don't know in the forest of I don't know, and it reminded him of the time he was in the city of I don't know chasing the enemy that I don't know, and it feels like I don't know it. I don't want to be like negative. It feels like kind of a cheap way to
Hmm.
flex your world building muscles by like dropping 10 different terms or names on me in the first page and saying, hey, have fun untangling the video game controller cords of this situation, I'd rather be a little more slowly introduced and intrigued than like immediately confused. But I know a lot of people love that. A lot of people love, oh, I can't wait to figure out what that is and stuff. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on that. Like, do you like that? And how do you see that?
That's a great question. And I think I'll start by evading it.
In true
So,
teacher fashion,
yes, in true teacherly fashion. Just to remark though, because it does make me think a lot about how fantasy is unique in this respect, that much of the time, and this is not necessarily true of all fantasy because there's portal fantasy and that sort of thing, but it
Right.
tends to be true of nearly all, I think, fantasy world building, and yes, in so-called realism or novels about this world, there's world building too. We just don't tend to think of it that way, but it's easier in a sense because if I have a novel that's set in New York, you know, I just can describe Times Square the way I see it, and people will recognize, hopefully, that I'm talking about Times Square, or just say it's Times Square. And a lot of people will already know what it's like, you know, even if they haven't been there, they've heard of Times Square and they have an idea, right? You've seen it when the ball drops on New Year's Eve and that sort of thing.
Right.
So I can lean on that. Fantasy, of course, often or mostly, or maybe not always, I don't want to say always, but mostly, you're having to present something entirely new to people. And as a consequence, you have a problem, because it's boring to just write a whole lot of exposition and description. And you see it done badly a lot, where and even in like dialogue, they're trying to get you up to speed about the history of that world because it's important for the story of the present. So you have characters having this very unrealistic wooden dialogue talking about, and the evil villain is the one over there in that very haunted looking castle, and blah blah blah. And so it's really hard for a fantasy writer in that sense. We have an extra task to somehow conjure this world out of nothing, and to give our reader a sense of being immersed in that world. And so it's very easy, I think, and maybe everybody has their sweet spot. It's going to differ. Some people, as you say, like a lot of this world building in order for them to feel immersed and lost in that world. I think of Robert Jordan, you know, in the Wheel of Time series, for example. There's a lot of, you know, not just landscapes and cities and so forth, but even like clothing. The amount of text devoted to descriptions of clothing it felt anyway to me as I was reading it, like, wow, okay, I'm down to the buttons and everything else, you know. So you know, some people love that. Some people, that's one of their favorite features of fantasy, and then others don't really want that. They want something else. They want the plot, or they want more character, like more psychological exploration, that sort of thing. So for me, I kind of all over the place with that. I can see it depends on what you want for your pacing. So if you're, you know, somebody who likes Joe Abercrombie's books, the First Law books,
right? Yep.
He tends to not spend much time on description. He tends to put you right in the moment, emphasizing action and dialogue and character development, and relatively little description.
Right.
So a very different author, when you mentioned Ursula Le Guin in Wizard of Earthsea, there's not much description there. It's very idea-based, I would say, very theme-based writing. And I love it. Whereas as Jordan's a good example, I think, of one who does, or maybe George R.R. Martin is a good example, one who does a lot of, you know, what they're eating and how it was cooked and all of that, you know, it tends to be part of it. And again, I'm okay if that's, you know, that's, I can be in the mood for both of those things. But I definitely recognize that you're going to affect the pace of your story if you choose to go more on the side of description and immersion versus a plot that goes bam, 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 you know, and you want to just hit your reader and keep your reader engaged in that way. Or another, you know, possible thing is like Le Guin is a good example of one who really pulls you in through the themes, through the humanity of what she's doing. She, you know, makes you think and engages you on a different level, I think, from those other things. So there's a place for all of it, I guess, is my evasion there.
Well, that was a good evasion and a thoughtful one.
That makes sense.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. I think so. I also, for me, I can draw a line between the world building elements and the descriptions. Like I think of, for example, like you said, George R. R. Martin, and that's another series I didn't mention. Song of Ice and Fire is definitely in my top 10. Love that series.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
But not so much the adaptation towards the end, but love the book
yeah.
series.
The last really season was the worst. The 8th season was, and season 7, there were plenty of warning signs, I think, in season 7.
It's wild to me how quickly it just disappeared from American culture after that. Like a month or two later, you just never heard anybody even talking about Game of Thrones, which is wild to me. Because
talk about it, a lot of people hollering at you.
Yeah. So that was crazy to me.
Yeah.
But in that, you had mentioned like the talk of the food and the clothing. I don't mind that so much. It can definitely get away from the author. I feel like sometimes I feel like Tolkien does a little bit of that too much. Like we've seen a lot of hills today, this chapter, and I don't know how many different ways we can describe them today. But I don't mind so much of that because I do like the visuals, and I'm a big visual guy when it comes to that kind of storytelling. It's just like the sort of forced like names and terms with the expectation that I care
Oh, I see.
before I do. And that's another thing like I really only have two major kind of critiques of a lot of fantasy. That is one where I want to be intrigued as opposed to confused.
Yeah.
And the other is that I don't love to be started in conflict, which I feel like is a very easy thing to start your story as, because I I kind of like two of the Robin Hobb series, right? Like Live Ship Traders versus the first, like the Assassin's Apprentice book, right? So
Farseer
like
trilogy.
yeah, Farseer. So Assassin's Apprentice starts out a little bit slower, and I kind of like that, and I care by the time conflict happens. But with Live Ship, I feel like I know it's a hot take because I'm sure a lot of your audience loves this series, but it starts out like right away with this argument, right, between the main character and like her brother-in-law, right, the captain. Um,
Kyle. Yeah.
and yeah, and that didn't work for me as much because I
Hmm.
didn't care about the character yet. And so I didn't really care what the outcome of that argument was going to be or what the stakes were, because I met the character a sentence ago, right? And
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
hard for me to find that investment. Uh, like conflict before care is kind of like the way I summarize it. Like I want to care before there's conflict. I don't want conflict before I care.
Yeah.
And so that can turn me off in a lot of cases too. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah. Well, when you talk about Farseer, another good one is Tad Williams' trilogy, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, which starts out a lot of people today, people who grow up on more modern fantasy, would find those two series, Farseer and Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, to be very slow to begin with. And what both authors are doing in each case is they're introducing you not only to the world, but to the characters, getting you to feel something for these characters and their place in this world, and investing in them, and immersing yourself in all of this. And they take their time with that. The problem, I think, is partly screens, and storytelling on screen tends to have pushed storytelling in writing in this direction of bam, 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 bam. It's this.
Right.
I think a lot of people's storytelling expectations come from screens more than from books these days.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I also think that it's easier to start with conflict on the screen because there's so much other visual data and things that you can connect to and that can intrigue you, even down to like the color grading of the scene, right? That can pull in your attention and your interest. Whereas when it's just words on a page, for me, if it's starting with conflict, it's just kind of hard because there's just no pull for me. Like I have no skin in the game because I haven't really come to care about the characters yet. And so that for me is like a really makes me kind of fickle with certain fantasy because I get a page or two in and I'm like, I don't care about this. One of the examples that I kind of think of too, like I love a lot of Sanderson stuff, but I feel like Way of Kings does the same thing to me. It has the same effect on me,
Oh,
where it starts out like
definitely.
kind of right in a battle.
Well, not only
And
that, but it starts off with this prologue that happens
right.
thousands of
Right. Yeah,
thousands of years
exactly.
before the
Yeah.
story.
So it kind of
So it
does
just
both of the things that I don't love. It confuses me instead of intrigues me, and it starts to clown before care. But then other Sanderson stories, that even some of his secret project ones that he did some readings of. I don't know if you watched those or not, but the one, like I think it's like Uni or Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. I think it was one of the later ones, but I loved that one because I feel like it started off not like super slow, but it got me into the character more and the world more. And I started, as soon as the first conflict came, I really did care about the character. So I'm really excited to read that one when it comes out because I love that. So even authors within an author's sort of bibliography or whatever, I can like and dislike certain stories just based on, I guess I'm a little bit too picky, but but those kind of criteria can make me kind of DNF like even stories by authors that I love. So
Yeah. I mean, Way of Kings it's a little bit funny because Sanderson is by no means the only author. In fact, it's a pretty common thing to do, to have a prologue that is
right.
disconnected in time from the main story. And when you get something like Way of Kings and you're like, okay, who is this guy? All right, I think I know this guy now. Oh, and these others are okay, fine. And these things, I need to know what they are. They sound important.
Mhm.
And then thousands of years later, you're like, wait, I have to start all over again, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That stuff
So,
doesn't work for me quite as well, which I think is another reason why I drift to things like Harry Potter, or I guess in Song of Ice and Fire, you do have in like their prologue they're going out to into the beyond the wall, right?
yeah.
And that I feel like is actually fine for me because I kind of know from the vibe that those characters are going to die, like like that these guys are toast, and that they're just kind of fodder for the world building. But then we go from there to, I believe, Bran right away. And then you get that sort of a little bit slower. You're welcoming the king's sort of caravan and things like that. So that really does work for me. And it has a prologue, but it's just in a different way that um, it still serves the purpose and doesn't quite confuse me or overwhelm me, because I kind of get the gist right away that like this is not something I need to add to my notes, or put on my spreadsheet of, okay, I got to remember this, and my whiteboard of connecting plot lines and things. I kind of know in that Song of Ice and Fire prologue that I don't need to do that. So it takes a lot of pressure off me as a reader. I don't like to feel that crazy amount of pressure to like keep up with stories, which I guess can make me a lazy reader. But it's just for me, I don't love that. I love things more like in the vein of Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings and things like that. I don't necessarily need an entire chapter on the Hobbit life, necessarily, but I do love.
Fellowship of the Rings.
Yeah,
it starts about as slowly as you can get.
Yeah, it's a tough one. That I think back to my Shire joke. Like I'm like, I'm gonna get to this talk with Philip, and I'm gonna be in the Shire still. So but I do love this series. And so I don't know how to put it, but I guess I'm kind of picky in the beginning. Like you got to do the beginning right for me, which I think is obvious for all books, right? Like you want to get that beginning, that opening chapter or two done really well, because as a reader, I get turned off by like really simple things, I feel like. And maybe that's a me problem, probably is a me problem. But it still is a problem for me. So
well, I think that A Song of Ice and Fire, and specifically A Game of Thrones, the first book, is a good example of a good start, like a very great prologue. And the reason I say it is because it's good writing, number one, but I also think it does a great job of giving you a sense of some conflict that is part of this world that is going to be important. And it gives you an introduction to the grittiness of that world, the tone. He's telling us, here's the tone of this. This is going to be, this is tonally what you should expect, right? And he does a lot of, I think, that through some very efficient character work in that prologue. And he introduced us to some of the big themes that we should be expecting. And that's what a prologue that's the job of a prologue, is to introduce you to the themes that you should be on the lookout for. And so it is possible to have a prologue that is disconnected from the main story by thousands of years, but is telling you, look for these themes because this is going to come up again. And I think that some series that I love, like the Malazan Book of the Fallen, for example, a lot of those 10 books have prologues that are very disconnected in time from what follows, but they're always telling you, look out, here's what you need to expect here. And if you go back to the prologues after finishing, you can see a lot of stuff. Suddenly it's like, oh, that's what he was doing there. That is so cool. So if that's a series, again, where it would annoy you probably a lot in Gardens of the Moon, which there is an initial shorter prologue, and then it just throws you into this crazy, like, whoa, where am I? And you just hit the ground running, and you're in the middle of this conflict, and you're like, who are these people? So that is a turnoff for a lot of people, I think. But if you have the patience to get through that and let things fall into place, it can be incredible. That's a series that I'm on the books. I'm on the record of saying it's the greatest literary journey I've ever been in.
Hmm.
And it does some of the things that you said annoy you. So, just be forewarned if you ever do pick it up.
Yeah, I do. I've tried that series, I think years ago, but
Uh-huh.
I haven't reattacked it since. And I think just for you, I will.
Mm.
But and I will summon my inner fortitude, because I feel like it's like this great challenge of literature, right? Or fantasy literature. It's kind of like the thing that's like, oh man, this is the mountain of fantasy lit to climb, and you're a real true American hero if you can get get all the way to the top,
Well, Steven
so.
Erickson is actually Canadian,
Oh,
so.
a true Canadian hero, yeah. But yeah, that is one that I definitely would like to try. There are a lot of the modern fantasy, a lot of the books that you cover and stuff I've delved into. I'm sort of like uh, inching my way into different ones, like the Joy Abercrombie stuff,
Good. Yeah.
the Kings of the Wild and things like that.
Uh-huh.
So,
Yeah.
and some of those really do work for me because they have the that sort of, I hate saying slow because I don't love slow beginnings. I just like intriguing, get me to care
Where you like a
beginnings.
sense of investment
Yeah,
from the
exactly,
beginning.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good thing to have, I would say. But if you do decide to tackle Malazan, just one tip for you would be to roll with the fact that Erickson does a lot of subversion of tropes. And the classic example being, we usually read a fantasy and expect a hero or at least a group of protagonists or something that we're going to follow along with. That's not going to happen, right? So don't
Right.
feel like, oh, where's the hero now? Why are we going over here?
Hmm.
He's doing something with that. Just be patient and see where it goes.
Yeah.
So it's I think it's often the case that we like to identify with a protagonist or group of protagonists in a story, especially fantasy, but in other stories too, to give us a sense of meaning and importance. Like, well, we are important. I can save the world, that sort of thing, which feels good, but is it a reflection of our authentic experience in the universe? And for me personally, I've been humbled enough by life to realize I'm not the center of the
Yeah.
universe.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so no one individual is. And Malazan has a way of, for me, giving me a sense, a truer sense of our place in the universe than any other series I've read in fantasy. So, but it's unconventional in that respect. And Erickson and his friend Esselmont, who also writes Malazan books, they seem to enjoy subverting and upending and inverting tropes that a lot of fantasy people like expect in their fantasy. So it can be, I think, it can be an adjustment for some readers in that respect.
Yeah, I admire a good subversion. I admire a good challenge. And so
Yeah.
hopefully I'll get that reward from Malazan as I read
Yeah.
it. It is Malazan, right? I feel like everybody pronounces it differently.
Yeah, well, any pronunciation is fine. I'm not condemning anyone who says Malazan or whatever, but I tend to say Malazan simply because the authors say Malazan, and it is the name of the empire is the Malazan Empire because it started on the Isle of Malaz, and
Ah,
therefore it's like Rome equals Roman,
right.
Malaz equals Malazan
Yeah,
as the
the
adjective. So yeah.
traditional etymology kind of thing. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
So, but it's not like you're going to get arrested by the fantasy police if you say something, different. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'll run back to my grammar corner if I offend any of the fantasy crew. So,
That works.
so can I ask you what like your favorite style of I guess like protagonist is? Like, do you like the kind of moving perspectives, like you had mentioned in Malazan, where it's not really a main character? Do you like the excuse me, pardon my coughs throughout this, by the way, I'm getting over some
Oh,
allergies, but
no worries.
do you like the more like fluctuating perspectives, like a Song of Ice and Fire? Do you like a more blank slate kind of main character, like a Frodo or Harry? Like what do you enjoy when you read? Like what kind of protagonist group or individual do you like to, or style do you prefer?
Wow. Well, I think I can be a fan of a lot of different styles. When I did my own writing, I started out with more of the multi-perspective thing, but also some clear protagonists that we're going to follow along with. So I'm probably somewhere in between um, the more traditional, Lord of the Rings kind of thing, where you have these characters that you're going to be with the whole time, and A Song of Ice and Fire, where you get these multi POV, chapters with, and what happens with Martin is there get to be more and more of these perspective characters as it goes along. And I did the same thing, although I'm not attempting to do something as big. I'm no way. Am I doing anything on the scale of The Song of Ice and Fire or Wheel of Time or the Malazan Book of the Fallen? I've got a trilogy, and they're not short books either. When they're published, they're probably going to be, I'm guessing, around, the first one would probably be around 500 pages.
Okay.
And then they get longer from there, but not 1,000 pages.
Yeah.
So I am not attempting that scale. So I do have multiple POVs, but I'm not on the scale of those huge things. So I'm probably somewhere in the middle is what I'm trying to say in terms of my own approach, but I can appreciate anything really in terms of that. What about you? You're also writing, right? So
Yeah. I've been
what are your
struggling
thoughts?
lately with kind of determining what that protagonist squad or individual is going to be, because for the longest time I had thought, I kind of dismissed the idea of ever doing the sort of blank slate vehicle for the story character, like a Harry Potter or a Frodo, who
Yeah.
I would consider that way. I don't know if you would agree with that, but like rather flat personality wise, kind of normal personality. I don't know if you would agree with that take or not, but
Well, I think it's a kind of you could think of it, one way to think of it is in terms of like a sort of a Campbellian hero's journey sort of thing, where you have a naive, sheltered individual, your Bilbo Baggins, who lives in the womb of the Shire and is forced to go out into the world and grow up and encounter scary things that make that protagonist mature. So that's the kind of thing I think you're talking about, right?
yeah.
The blank slate thing. Yeah. I think that's look, that exists for a reason. It's effective.
Right.
It exists because we go through lives where we have points of maturation. We have rites of passage, and to enact them in a story that is a bit more perilous, probably, than what most of us go through in our own lives, is to, I think, vicariously reenact our own points of maturing or anticipating our points of maturing. And that's a healthy, necessary thing, perhaps. So that thing is, I don't have a problem with that. It's been done and it's been done and it's been done, but there are always new ways to tell these old stories. That's what we're doing, essentially, I think. So
Yeah. I had kind of thought about it in a way of, like I feel like a lot of people, like we I go back to Harry Potter as an example, or Lord of the Rings. I feel like a lot of people's favorite stories are those stories.
uh-huh.
But if you ask them who their favorite character is, I feel like very few of them would say Harry or Frodo. Like they would probably say somebody else. And
Interesting.
so
Yeah.
I certainly for Harry Potter, I would say that that's true. I don't know a single person whose favorite series is Harry Potter and their favorite character is Harry.
Interesting.
It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I
You
love
might
Ron.
get a
I love,
comment in the comments, but
yeah.
yeah.
I love Harry.
I suspect you're actually right, though. The majority of people wouldn't cite the main character in that kind of story as necessarily their favorite. Yeah.
Right. And so I had thought about that when I approached writing. It's like, okay, well, if that character is nobody's favorite, then why am I going to do a character like that? Why wouldn't I do a main character who's got a little more personality or a little more of this? And I actually tried to sort of audition some characters in scenes from other books. I think I had tried like putting some of my characters on the train to Hogwarts and seeing what would happen in that scene, and how different that would be. And I found that it didn't really work that well when I had the main character with a very strong personality, because you you lose the sense of like being able to put yourself in that character. And I feel like you drift a little more towards like some of those YA protagonists that are very specific in their personality. And if you don't like their personality, you probably don't like the book, because you're kind of
Yeah.
stuck in that character's head. And so I
Yeah.
realized kind of like, oh, well, perhaps the reason that these authors do this is because it's very easy for you to slip into that character's shoes, and
Yep.
it's
Yep.
they're very accessible to you, and they don't have to be they don't have to have this very specific personality, or very specific quirks. They can just be kind of like a vanilla sort of character that you can feel accessible to, because if you feel like there's a roadblock, like you can't connect with the character, they have a certain thing about them, a certain shtick that they do that you don't, it's like, I wouldn't do that, or I couldn't see myself there, then that may cause you to pull away. And I think maybe the reach of Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter speaks to that fact of like, hey, our main characters are accessible, anybody could see themselves here. They make decisions that a normal person would probably make. They react how a normal person would probably react. And so, although those characters may not be your favorite in the story, they're the reason that you probably like the story so much, because you're seeing yourself maybe as them, and you're surrounded by these other great, colorful characters, whoever in both of those series, right? There's so
Right.
many
Right.
side characters that contribute and give value and meaning to the story. So when I was approaching my own writing, I realized that actually rather recently, considering, hey, maybe I do go with that sort of Harry Frodo
Yeah.
style
Yeah.
character, although it may seem boring to write. And it's still, if you kind of surround them with the right supporting cast and you world build your story well, it works. Like, it works for a reason. Like, there's a reason those two series are so popular, because that strategy must work. Like you said, it must work if those are some of the more famous series that there are. So
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you ask yourself the question, who's the favorite person in your life? You're not going to say, oh, me, myself, right?
right, yeah, that's actually a really great point. You're kind of the main character of your journey, and
Yep.
oftentimes you're not your favorite person on their journey, right? I think of vacations. I sometimes hate vacations because I have to go there and then I'm there and I'm like, well, I'm trying to get so but yeah, I'm struggling with that right now, maybe in a good way, to kind of develop that main cast of characters, and who are they and what roles do they fill, and who can foil another character in the party, so that there's a nice dynamic. And I
Yeah.
do like anime and manga so much, but a lot of those characters don't translate as well to the written like
Uh-huh.
word. Even the manga ones, they can just be sort of loud and animated, like I said earlier. And you have to kind of tone them down a little bit. You have to sort of
Yeah.
give them a chill pill a little bit, just to make them work on a page without being super annoying, or things getting old very quickly. So I'm
Yeah.
working through that right now when it comes to character design, and trying to figure out, how do I want my characters to be? Who do I want my characters to be? And all that kind of stuff. So
Very cool. Well, I think it's important to just remember that tropes exist for a reason. We tend to speak about them in a negative light when we speak about them, but they exist for a reason. And that's because if they're done well, then they're a tool, simply a tool. They can be done well and they can be done poorly. And when they're done well, we can talk about them as like archetypes or whatever. But
yeah.
when they're done poorly, we call them cliches. But they're simply a tool. And to have a main character who is a bit of a blank slate, who is naive, who is sheltered, and has to go out into the world and experience this. A lot of people talk about the death of this kind of narrative, and I think that that's a bit premature to talk about the death of this kind of narrative, because it works for a reason, and it can be done well, just like any other tool. It can be used well. So I think there will be plenty of room for stories where you have characters who go out into the world, and I have a character like that myself in my writing. So I sure hope that there's space for that type of stories still.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. So any other reads that you're like eager to get to in terms of fantasy that are definitely something on your radar in the near future?
I was kind of hoping to get some from you actually. Tap into the resource that is you and BookTube, and kind of get some feelers out there. I feel like I've expressed kind of my tastes fairly well. So I
Yeah.
wonder what, based on that, you would recommend, or even like you had said with Malazan, a book that might challenge
Yeah.
those tastes a little bit. So
Yeah.
I
Malazan
wonder.
sure.
I haven't really
Yeah.
considered. I feel like I've dipped my toes, like I said, in a lot of them, but haven't fully committed really
Yeah.
hard to a lot either. So I'm wondering what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. Have you tried John Gwynn's books yet? The Faithful and the Fallen, and
I have not. No.
okay, that might be one. That's one where you do have, without giving much away, you have among others, you do have that character we were just talking about, a relatively young person who has a lot to learn about the world and is sort of thrown out into it, and has to learn the hard way in many cases. But he does a lot with that. His latest series is a bit different. It has a much more Viking vibe to it.
Okay.
But his original series, The Faithful and the Fallen, is, I'd say, an example of a series that does that character pretty well. And a lot of people love this character. What else? I don't know. I mean, if you're looking for something a little more unconventional, not epic fantasy, and one that I'm just getting into myself is the Dresden Files.
Yeah,
Harry
heard of it,
Dresden.
and I think I've read a few of those books actually, and liked them. It was just a long time ago.
Yeah, I feel like, and I'm only 5 books in. I've read 5 books. I feel like this is a series where you're going to get the unfolding, the gradual unfolding of the central character, Harry Dresden, and what everything that's behind him, and it's urban fantasy. It's set in modern
Yeah,
Chicago at first,
yeah.
at least, and
And
it
it's a little bit campy too, right? At time, like the humor and
very,
things. Yeah, yeah,
very,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I remember liking that. So
yeah. So I don't know. What else? Yeah, and Malazan is awesome. You started on Earthsea already.
yeah, I think
I would
I've
say, oh, if you
gotten through
haven't,
Earthsea, but
so you've read at least Farseer and Live Ship Traders in
I've
one.
read the first two books of Farseer
Okay.
and DNF'd the first one of Live Ship because of
Okay.
the aforementioned problems.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah.
Not
So,
that I wouldn't go back to it if it was,
okay. I mentioned Tad Williams earlier. So Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn might be
Yep,
one.
heard of that. Yep.
It's a 90s, early 90s book, with a definitely starts out in more classical fantasy kind of way. But a lot of writers today cite Tad Williams as an important influence.
Okay.
So that's one for sure. And yeah, and the main character there again is this naive character who has a lot to learn, and is booted out into the world, and to do it. So, and I think he does that really well, you know. And a lot of people will say at first they don't even like this main character, but gradually warm up to this character. And that's the thing that happens too, is the character tends to get scarred and go through stuff and learn stuff. The character tends to develop more personality in that process too. So
Nice.
oh gosh, yeah. I mean, there are so many, that and you've already started. You've done King Killer, the first 2 books.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a big fan of those.
I'm not sure we'll ever
Hate the
get the
main character,
third, but
but big fan.
I do love the first 2 as well.
What'd you say about the third? Sorry.
I'm not sure we'll ever see it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Brandon Sanderson will write it at some point. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he
yeah,
could write it, in a few months, I'm sure, if he wanted to.
yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure I'll think of a few more for you. But have you tried N.K. Jemisin yet? The Broken Earth trilogy?
Yeah, yeah, I have.
Okay.
Those are cool. I like the visuals and the vibe of that. Yeah.
That's a trilogy I really, really love and respect a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, and what else? I don't know. Trying to think of what I'm reading right now. Dark Tower. Have you read Dark Tower?
Yep. Yeah, that's
Okay.
one I've gotten through.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, sci-fi fantasy combo kind of in a sense.
Horror.
Yeah. It's got
name it.
the whole shebang. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was one I started reading a long time ago as well. So a little lost in my memory, but
Yeah.
definitely have checked that out. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. I'm starting to get more and more into self-published fantasy as well. And one
Yeah, I
of
saw you.
yeah.
Like I said at the beginning, I love that you shine some light on those people. I feel like that's such a great
Yeah.
thing to do. It's easy to sort of kind of shoot down, upcoming authors' careers by reviewing, giving negative reviews of self-published fantasy and things like that. So I love that you, and
Yeah.
I've seen other people do it too, but I definitely feel like you're one of the pioneers of that, of just saying, hey, I'm going to shout out these self-published authors. Are there any that you're really loving or that you have read recently that you really love?
Yeah, yeah. So I recently reviewed one that I really, really like a lot. Von Roycroft is the name of the author, and his book, The Severing Sun, is the first part of a trilogy, the Sundered Nation trilogy. That's one I really liked a lot.
Did you have him on your channel as well?
Yes, recently
Yeah.
yep. So there's a video of him talking to me and
Yeah.
chatting about that book. And so you can always learn more about it that way. I also reviewed it and got to do the cover reveal for it. So that was really cool.
Sure.
Yeah. And then another one who's got a complete trilogy out, if you want to try, it's more grimdark though, is Richard Nell.
Okay.
His Ash and Sand trilogy, which begins with Kings of Paradise. And I haven't finished the trilogy yet, but I intend to probably next year. So that's a good one. And another one that I really liked is very different, but it's called Dreams of the Dying by Nicholas Lietzau. And it's one that I cited before, but it's one where you just get this incredible, brave tackling of the theme of depression in that book. So it's really cool for that, I would say. It's
Awesome.
unique in that sense. I haven't read a fantasy that tackles depression quite so directly.
Nice. How are you finding these self-published books? Like, what are you scouring to, or are you getting them like sent to you, or how do you kind of come upon them?
Oh yeah, usually authors approach me and say, "Hi, I'm so and so. I got this." In fact, I've got a backlist now of books I've booked until well into 2023 at this point.
Yeah.
With the self-published stuff, because I've said yes to quite a few that I haven't gotten to yet. So I love discovering new reads, and but there's only one of me, and I don't have a ton of time because I have a career and a family.
Yep.
And
Yeah, I know teacher/professor life very well. So
yeah. So unfortunately, I can't read all the ones that I get right away, or even necessarily at all. But usually it's an author approaching me and saying, "Would you be willing to check out this? I'll send you a copy." So that's usually how it goes. But there are a few. I'm at the point now where I'm starting to hear more about self-published books that I'm just going to go out and buy and read for my own
yeah, absolutely.
pleasure.
And publishing's changing, right? I mean, your the avenues for promoting are way better now. You've got things like Kickstarter and stuff like that, where you can really lift a book off the ground a lot easier if you have the right social media presence and things like that. So
that's the key. Yeah, I think publishing is changing. And the fact of the matter is, even if you publish traditionally, you have to have a social media presence. You're being expected by the publishing houses to do the heavy work of marketing your book much more than was the case in former times. And in fact, most of the time, as far as I can tell, the traditional publishers do little to no marketing for you. So, I mean, that is a disincentive for anyone to go that route, frankly, I think. And I understand they're under all kinds of pressure. So they will put, their resources behind the titles they think are going to do really well. And, that's great for them, but for the majority of the books they publish, those authors are on their own, more or less. And which seems a little unfair to me in the sense that they're still going to take whatever it is, 90% of the sales price. So yeah, I think it is changing. Things are changing to some degree, and I think it's a good thing overall. I'm sad, and I know there are a lot of great people who work in traditional publishing who are trying to put out great stories, and but they're under tremendous pressure, I think. I think that self-publishing has never been more viable. That said, I think that everybody who wants to go into it really needs to understand how hard you need to work to craft a good story. It's a mistake to think that you can write a novel and just say, okay, I'm done, and then go print it and think that it's going to be your best work, because it's not. I think you really have to be open to a lot of feedback, a lot of criticism, and if you can afford it, even hire a professional editor, but get people who are going to be critical, not your mother, not your best friend.
Right.
Get people who are going to be critical and very insightful to help you improve that story again and again and again, and then think about publishing it. But yeah, it's never been more viable, but I think maybe some people don't quite get just how hard it still is to craft a book that is going to be a great read for people. So
yeah, I learned that lesson kind of the hard way in college. My honors college senior thesis at my school was a novel. I wanted to write a novel, and
cool.
they asked me if I was sure about that about 100 times, because it was a semester class. But I was like, yeah, I want to do that. And I did it. And at that time, like you had said, I didn't give it to enough people to read. I didn't give it to enough critical people to read.
Yeah.
And I had this weird, I was thinking, oh, I'm going to be the next Christopher Paolini or something. I'm going to publish this novel at 22. It's going to be amazing. No one needs to look at it. Like I put my pen to it, and I'm God's gift to writing, or whatever, you think in college. And so I went and I shopped around for agents. I queried out, like probably 300 different agents to see if I could get published traditionally. And that's when you realize, like, when you get the 250th no, you're like, maybe there's something I could be doing better with this. Like, maybe I should have given this to a few more people. And it ended up getting to I think I got an offer from like a regional publisher, not like one of the big ones, but one of the smaller ones. But even still, it's like I have been in that process so long that by the time I got that offer, it was so obvious to me that the story was not ready, and that there were so many things that I should have done with it. I should have found more people's, I should have gotten more eyes on it. I should have maybe perhaps even hired a professional editor if I had the means.
If you can afford it, it's expensive.
But there were just so many things that, like you said, there's so much that goes into it. And for me, I was planning to traditionally publish self-publishing. Yeah, you have the additional stuff of like designing your stuff, who's to do in your cover art, and all that kind of, just all these little things that I think people don't even consider when they're writing. Like, I write the book, that's it, right? It's like, well, no, it's not it. There's so much more beyond just writing the book. And like you said, even writing the book, you need eyes, you need criticism. And I feel like maybe, as a teacher, you can have the same perspective, but I see this in my students a lot, is like,
oh yeah,
my better writers don't want anyone to read their stuff. And it's like, well, you're going to get so much better if you do, though, because they have that sort of weird combination of security and insecurity. They're like, I know I'm good, but at the same time, I don't want you to say anything bad about my writing, so please don't read it. And so I feel like the sooner you can get over that hump as a writer of saying, hey, this is my story, give me all the feedback you have. I'll accept the stuff that I think applies. I'll kind of pass on the stuff that I think doesn't apply. But as soon as you can open yourself up to that criticism with any art, but certainly with writing, your story is going to take it, it's going to sail to new levels. And I think I didn't realize that until I was already trying to query for publication. And I finally figured out, like, wait a minute, maybe there's a reason a lot of 22-year-olds don't have, #1 bestsellers. Perhaps it's because they still have much to learn. And so here I am now at 31, considering feeling like I'm finally doing it the right way.
Yeah. That's about how old I was when I started writing my series, my trilogy. So I think I was 32 even, but yeah.
And you're 35 now, or?
Yes. 3 years have gone by. Yeah.
I saw your tennis video and I was like, oh boy, if I'm in that great a shape when I'm his age, that would be very impressive.
Well, what you don't see is a video of me the next day when I'm but yeah, no, writing is an incredible journey, and it is a huge commitment. You don't do it to make money, that's for sure. It's something you do because you're passionate about it, and it is something you have to work really hard at to get good at. At least that's true for me. I'm not a genius. I certainly had to spend a lot of time crafting and getting better and learning. And I am so glad that my initial efforts were never got anywhere, because that was my incentive to get better and to realize I need to get better. So that's, you work on it and you work on it, and it's hopefully steady tapping that breaks the stone, so.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of inherent narcissism in writing and art, right? Like you're writing
Yeah.
something with the idea that like people are going to want to read hundreds of pages that I wrote. And so
Right.
there's some kind of built-in self-absorption and vanity into that process. And
Oh yeah.
the sooner you can shatter that glass and say, hey, I am writing this thing. I do think it would be really cool, but I think it'd be a lot better if like you could look at it and you could tell me what you think and you could give me the feedback,
Yeah.
and opening yourself up for that growth, because it's very easy to get trapped in the idea of like I go off to my tower somewhere and I write my book alone, and when I come down and it's finished and it's amazing. It's like that just isn't how it works, man.
Nope, nope. Yeah, I would love to be a writing wizard, but unfortunately, that is not how it works.
Yeah, me
It's a
neither.
strange combination of believing in yourself and humility that it takes to work that hard, to craft that, to be open. You make yourself incredibly vulnerable as a writer too. It's almost like going out in public naked,
Yeah, yeah.
you put that out there and it's just like you're bearing your soul, in some
Mhm.
ways. So it's a crazy thing that we do, but somehow we feel compelled to do it. So
Yeah, I think there's just the love for the story is probably first and foremost, right? Just like
mhm.
wanting to be a part of that sort of legacy of people who tell stories and share stories out. And yeah, like you said, it can definitely feel, especially when you have to really be finished with something, right? Like when you can make no more changes to it. So, at that point it's no longer yours. It's yours when you're going through the revisions and making the changes, but at some point, you
Yeah.
turn it in and it's whatever's going to happen to it, it's no longer yours. And I can see now why a lot of authors don't read their own books, or actors don't watch their own movies, because you're like, man, if I watch, like, I never watch my own YouTube videos, for example. So when people comment on them, I have to like guess at what they're like. That example you gave at 3 minutes and 55 seconds is, I'm like, I think I made a note about that in the description of the video, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Because I would feel the same way, like, oh, my hair and my voice there and the mic setup was bad, and I can't believe the lighting of that, and and
Yeah.
so I can definitely see like there's that fear when you're writing and you get to the end of the project and you say, this is going to be no longer mine soon. I'm going to have to make the final changes and send this off, and live with that forever if it's published, right? Unless you're going to do
Yep.
some weird thing where you revise it. But yeah, that there's a lot of pressure on that. And
Yep.
so, but there's also a lot of reward in letting something go and finishing things that have to be,
Yeah.
they have to have an ending for them to be beautiful, in my opinion. Like they have to end. So finishing is an important part of the process.
Absolutely. It's a bit like raising a child, I guess. And coming to that point where, yeah, okay, you're an independent, fully grown person now. So go out in the world, do your thing. I think
Right.
it's similar in some ways. But well, Kevin, this has been a huge pleasure. I really enjoyed this conversation with you, and I'm glad we got to talk about fantasy and writing. And once again, everybody, if you are at all interested in a little bit of help with those mechanical things to make your writing smoother and better, Kevin Spaans is the place to go. There's, I'm sure, a lot of things we could all learn from those types of videos to improve those little things. So if you've been wondering, how do I use a semicolon? There's a video for that.
If you happen to be wondering that at any point in your life, like a normal person would. Oh.
Well, as we said, we writers are strange people, I think. So I think you'll find that there's actually quite a bit of interest in the semicolon.
Right, right. And
Uh,
just thanks again, Philip, for having me. I appreciate it. Like I said, I'm not native to this community, and so I appreciate you and your audience opening up the space for me to come on and just talk books and talk fantasy and talk writing, and give me some of those great suggestions that hopefully I can reconnect with you about in the future. I'd love to
yeah.
talk Berserk with you if you ever get to it, or The Witcher,
Okay.
or anything in between. So definitely hit me up if that's ever an interest for you. But
Very
so
cool.
thankful to be here. Thankful to have this opportunity to come on and talk about all these different things. So again, I love what you do on this platform, and that's the reason that I wanted to talk with you today. I just love your humility, your energy, how you promote others, and how you just seem to be doing a service on the platform. And a lot of people, I think, are here for themselves to kind of get somewhere or be someone or whatever. And I don't get that energy at all from you. I get the energy of just joy and passion for books and fantasy, and the desire to uplift others and just share out that joy with people. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Kevin. That's very, very kind of you. I appreciate it very much. And thank you, everybody, for watching this episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy. And until next time.